Not too long ago, I played Spyro Season of Ice for the first time, kicking off my journey of discovering the unfamiliar corners of the Spyro series. And it was fine. It wasn't offensively bad, it wasn't impressively great, it was just okay. The problem was, I ended up getting bored of it. It stuck closely to the traditional Spyro formula, but it was very repetitive. It looked and sounded pretty good for GBA standards, but it was very repetitive. Collecting gems and fairies was satisfying, but it was very repetitive. Every level ended up having similar layouts and objectives, and it was very repetitive. The game tried to shake things up with speedways and sparks levels, but it was very repetitive. If I were to sum up the entire game with a single word, it would be to give Rytich to Wabmov, which stands for this game is very repetitive, and I think it could have done with a bit more variety. Playing Spyro Season of Ice was a bit like trimming a bush. You might not really enjoy doing it, and it can be hard, monotonous work, especially on a hot day, but you've got to get through it. Even though you're doing the same thing over and over to the point where you might get RSI, you've just got to keep at it until you're done. And the results might not even be that pleasing. You might end up cutting the hairs too short, and your partner might think your crotch looks like a child's crotch. And that's bad, because that means they've looked at the crotches of children, so your partner is effectively a pedophile. You need to call the police right now. It doesn't matter if you love them, they want to molest children, and you're fulfilling their sexual fantasy. Run away! Run away from that dirty bastard! I just realized that I could have used the trimming a bush analogy literally, referring to an actual bush that you would find in the great outdoors. So it's strange that I went for a pubic angle, especially because I don't even trim mine, I've basically grown my own pair of underwear. Anyway, playing Spyro Season of Ice was a bit of a chore, especially when you go for 100% like I did. It started out strong, but got pretty dull towards the end. Going into the next game, I'm expecting a very similar experience, but I'm crossing my fingers and hoping that Spyro 2 Season of Flame is better than Spyro Season of Ice. After starting the game and being dropped into the first hub world, my suspicions appeared to be confirmed. I thought, oh no, this game is going to be to give Rytich to Wabmov all over again, isn't it? That's certainly how it looked to start with. Initially just based on exploring the hub world, Season of Flame seemed to be almost plagiarizing Season of Ice. But after a few minutes of playing, I quickly realized that Season of Flame isn't a carbon copy of its predecessor, it's trying to do some different stuff. Season of Flame cements itself as something different pretty quickly. It seems to be an inverse of Season of Ice. In Season of Ice, the whole game revolved around freeing the fairies who were frozen by Grendor, who wanted to use the fairies' magic to reverse a spell that had gone wrong. Season of Flame spins this around. In Season of Flame, Ripto wants to rid the realm of all the dragons, so he steals all the fireflies, which causes the temperature to drop. If it drops too much, the dragons will be forced to leave the dragon realms. It's up to Spyro to gather the fireflies and make the dragon realms comfortable again, I guess. Before we go any further, can I just say that the actual story in Season of Flame is bad, and definitely worse than the story in Season of Ice? It's not really anything. Beyond the setup, there is no story. You don't even get to see Ripto until the final boss. At least in Season of Ice, Grendor is present throughout the whole thing. Season of Flame's story seems so much emptier and lazier. It's literally just the Elder Dragon going, Spyro, I'm cold. It sucks. However, I'm willing to forgive that, because the story is actually the cause for one of the big changes in the gameplay. In terms of control and movement, Spyro is exactly the same here as he was in Season of Ice. And I mean exactly the same. Nothing has changed, and to be honest, nothing really needed to change in that respect. He can run, jump, glide, and charge just as well as he could before. But what has changed is his flame breath. He doesn't have it. Instead, you start the game off with Ice Breath. Ice Breath is used as a way to catch fireflies as well as an attack. It also has a range of other applications depending on the level you're in and the enemies you fight. On its own, that's a minor change, but it's something different. As you play through the game, you'll unlock more abilities. Upon completing the level Country Farms, Bianca will return Spyro's Flame Breath to him, allowing Spyro to switch between Flame Breath and Ice Breath at will. Flame Breath functions the same way as it did in Season of Ice, but he has that in addition to his new Ice Breath. Later on, Spyro's charge will be powered up, allowing him to destroy massive boulders that his regular charge couldn't manage. You'll even eventually get an extra hit point for Sparks. Season of Flame is really making an effort to change up the way Spyro plays. It's still very similar to Season of Ice, but layers are being added to it to make playing as Spyro more interesting. There are even temporary power-up gates that come into play every so often. You've got Super Ice Breath that allows Spyro to freeze water and cross it like a bridge, and you've got Super Flame Breath, which is a more powerful, higher range version of his regular Flame Breath. There's also a Lightning Breath gate, which temporarily grants Spyro Lightning Breath, but beyond activating lightning-based objects and defeating certain enemies, it doesn't really add a whole lot. Honestly, I don't see why Lightning Breath was restricted to power-up gates. It seems like the sort of ability Spyro should just be able to learn innately. Even so though, Season of Flame is shaking up the gameplay quite a bit compared to Season of Ice, and this is just in relation to Spyro himself. Let's take a step out of Spyro's shoes. He doesn't wear shoes. Let's take a step out of Spyro's scales and take a look at his gameplay in context. Season of Flame is structured in exactly the same way as Season of Ice. In Season of Ice, the game was divided into hub worlds, each containing a handful of different standard levels, and a couple of levels that used a different gameplay style. In Season of Ice, these were speedways and sparks levels. It pretty much mimics the exact same formula as the original Spyro trilogy. The standard levels in Season of Ice were fine, but they lacked variety. Every standard level was basically the same thing in a different coat of paint, which led to the game coming down with a strong case of to give right hitch to web move. Each level has the same objectives for earning fairies, and they all had similar layouts. Well, at least it felt like they all had similar layouts. With a lack of a map or any way of zooming out to see what's around you, it was very hard to get a sense for how the level was structured. And what do you get when a game's levels are all identical? Well, a sense of to give right hitch to web move. Season of Ice attempted to add some variety with the speedways and sparks levels, but even they were a bit samey, and they weren't enough to fix the to give right hitch to web move nature of the game. Spyro Season of Ice was the video game equivalent of Groundhog Day. To be completely honest, going into Season of Flame, I was expecting it to fall into the exact same trap, but thankfully, this game tackles Season of Ice's to give right hitch to web move issue head on. It has refused to make the same mistakes. I couldn't be sure right away, but after just the first hub world, I knew that Season of Flame would be a better game. Compared to Season of Ice, Season of Flame goes above and beyond to make earning fireflies a much more engaging and interesting process. Some are just lying around in each level, and the thematically relevant flammable objects return, but everything else is wildly different. Instead of forcing you to do the same thing every time, this game has all sorts of unique challenges. Knocking bombs into water, returning a lost skull to its friend, escorting an alpaca, defending a cake, playing ice hockey, completing obstacle courses, all sorts of unique and varied objectives. And that's exactly what I wanted. Season of Ice's levels all blended together because of how similar they were. Aside from their themes, they were all just as unremarkable as each other. With diverse objectives, the levels in Season of Flame are much more memorable and enjoyable. What makes Season of Flame even more enjoyable is the quality of life changes. Beyond the to give right hitch to web move, Season of Ice had another major issue. Navigating levels was very tedious. It was very hard to grasp how each level was laid out. Every part of it looked the same, there was no individuality to each area, the same floor patterns kept repeating, and it was very easy to get lost. All I wanted from Season of Ice was a map. I just wanted to be able to see what was around me. I wanted to know where I was supposed to go. I wanted to be able to tell how high things were, how far away things were. I just wanted to know where the fuck I was. And Season of Flame answered my prayers with a map. As soon as I saw it, I came. Through my pubic underwear and into my actual underwear. This map fixes so many of Season of Ice's issues. It makes navigating levels and finding all the collectibles so much less of a chore. No leaps of faith, no bullshit hidden off screen, and nowhere near as many issues with depth perception. It genuinely helps so much. Season of Flame's levels also have checkpoints, something that was lacking in Season of Ice. I guess Sparks just got tired of being used as a sex toy. Watch my Season of Ice video for context. Now the fairies have their eyes on Spyro. I suppose his tail is about the right size and shape for... Anyway, checkpoints are very convenient as they are in every game ever. I don't think I need to explain why, it should be common knowledge. We take them for granted these days. In Season of Ice, I was begging for a checkpoint so that I didn't have to start the whole level over again when I fell into a pixel of water, because that's annoying. So I'm glad Season of Flame was generous enough to provide them. Season of Ice did struggle with To Give Right Titch to Wabmove, but it did attempt to fix the issue with Speedways and Sparks levels. They weren't the best, but they at least offered something different to the standard levels. In Season of Flame, the Speedways and Sparks levels have been completely removed. Instead, Season of Flame opts for two other playable characters, Agent 9 and Sheila, who offer very different gameplay styles. Agent 9's levels are side-scrolling shooter levels. I think they're decent. They're not as good as Spyro's levels, but I appreciate the shake-up. They aren't bad by any means. Actually, they remind me a lot of Shantae, but instead of hair, Agent 9 has a laser gun. He isn't very deep as a playable character, but he's enjoyable enough. Sheila, on the other hand, was not so enjoyable. Honestly, I think Sheila's levels are the weakest part of the game. They're easily the least fun part of the whole thing. Sheila's levels are... I don't really know what they are. They're almost like Pogo painted from Crash Bash. What you have to do in Sheila's levels is hop around on a grid, going around and stomping on objects in a specific order, defeating enemies as you go. But it controls so awkwardly. It's entirely diagonal movement, and the D-pad just isn't well suited to that. Diagonal movement uses the 4 directions that famously aren't on the D-pad. Whose idea was that? On top of that, the levels are just really boring. There isn't much happening in them. They're all extremely similar and they aren't really that fun to play. I would have much preferred playing as Sheila in a standard level, just like in Year of the Dragon, but they didn't go for that. They went with this boring shit. Sheila's levels are definitely suffering from To Give Right Titch to Wabmove. And I feel like I should mention that for some reason in the final Sheila level, the audio started freaking out. It was almost like the game was doing an impression of a woodchipper. So yeah, it was very loud, very irritating. I'm not really sure what caused it, but hey, could you quiet down? I'm trying to review a game here. Seriously? This is getting ridiculous. Would you shut up, you fucking asshole? Thanks, I really appreciate that. Now, where was I? Oh, you dick. Fuck you, that's it, I'm getting the hell out of this level. The only other piece of gameplay left to talk about is the boss fights. Season of Ice only had 2 boss fights. They were both against Grendor and were both exactly the same. They weren't great. Here in Season of Flame, the bosses are better. They feature Crush, Gulp and Ripto, and there's more to them than just charging into them over and over. They're actually a bit of a threat. They aren't great fights by any means, but at least they offer more of a challenge than Grendor. But while playing the game, I noticed that without all of Season of Ice's bullshit, without the lack of a map and checkpoints, without the To Give Right Titch to Wabmove, and without Speedways and Sparks levels, this game's fucking easy. Almost none of it is particularly hard. With the map, you're way less likely to get lost and accidentally die, the enemies don't really pose much of a threat, there isn't really any challenging platforming. It wasn't until the final hub world that the game decided to experiment with the dangerous and threatening level element of moving platforms. Beyond a handful of side challenges, Season of Flame is a really pathetic game. But you know what? I don't think that's a bad thing. The original trilogy of Spyro games isn't hard either. They're all pretty chill, I think. And the lack of bullshit made Season of Flame a lot less of a slog to get through than Season of Ice. With Season of Ice, I had to push myself to be bothered to get to the end. With Season of Flame, I was more than happy to keep playing. It's a fun game despite its lack of challenge. I even found it to be better presented than Season of Ice. The music is just as good as before, but the visuals are definitely nicer to look at. Some of Season of Ice's levels looked a bit disgusting. Honey Marsh and Hummingbird Fort come to mind here. But Season of Flame consistently looked a lot better. Environments looked like actual locations rather than a garbled mess of quadrangular patterns. I even prefer the text in this game. But now I think it's time we wrapped this up. We've learned quite a few things here today. Number 1, I need to get my pubes sorted out. Number 2, the word To Give Right Titch to Wabmove has not been as great of a success as I was hoping it would be. And number 3, Spyro 2 Season of Flame is a better game than Spyro Season of Ice. I mean, come on, it's undeniable. In pretty much every aspect, Season of Flame is superior to Season of Ice. Where Season of Ice has issues with quality of life and To Give Right Titch to Wabmove, Season of Flame triumphs with features and gameplay to make a much more fun experience. The map is a godsend, making navigating levels so much more convenient. Each level is unique with distinct objectives that are often fun and rarely repeated. Agent 9 and Sheila's levels are a cool change of pace, even if Sheila and her wonky, uncomfortable diagonal movement are this game's weakest link, and the bosses are much better here too. All in all, I think Season of Flame is a really solid improvement over Season of Ice. I ended up getting bored with Season of Ice and had to force myself to finish it. With Season of Flame, I was delighted to keep going and 100% it, and I think that really tells you everything. Spyro 2 Season of Flame is a much better game than Spyro Season of Ice. And now, I think it's time to put this word to rest. Thanks for everything to give Raitich to Wabmove, you will be missed.